All right, we are here on the Psych Substance Show, and I am here with Quentin. Quentin,
Hello.
founder of the Quentin Experiment YouTube channel that is blowing the up right now. What's up, man?
What's up, man? How are you?
I think you know how I am.
I think I know how I am as well.
Yeah.
And it's questionable, to say the least.
But why don't you elaborate? Why are you questionable?
Well, we went through a pretty transformative and powerful experience yesterday.
Day before
The
yesterday.
day before yesterday. You see, even my time is off.
Well, it did bleed technically into yesterday morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, that was an interesting trip for both of us because I think that was your first time entering someone else's mind.
It was indeed.
Like literally.
Yes, we had a very, very strange, I suppose, telepathic experience. And as somebody who's trying to become a scientist, I do not know what to make of that whatsoever.
Yeah, give everyone a background. What are you trying to become? What kind of scientist?
Well, currently I'm studying biochemistry, and I perform research in a lab where we work on ribosomes and things of that nature. And so I'm really trying to get down to, I suppose you could say, why these molecules or patterns of energy influence our behavior the way that they do.
Yeah, that's a pretty strange influenced behavior, to feel as though you are absolutely beyond shadow of a doubt convinced that you are either listening to the other person's thoughts or you actually are the other person having those thoughts.
Yes, I was completely unprepared for that experience.
But that's not normal. See, there's not many people who will trip with friends and will say, me and my buddy entered each other's minds, and we're fucking strangers.
Yes,
So how did that happen?
Although, to be fair, you spoke of previous experiences you've had like this, and they felt much more perhaps synchronous when you know the person well. It felt more like we were slightly separate platforms that did merge, but in a, I suppose, somewhat rocky way.
Yeah, Rocky's a good way.
There was some
Turbulence.
there was certainly some turbulence on the flight we just took.
Yeah. Like, and what I find interesting is when we weren't talking, we were communicating great. It's
Yes.
like communicating
Let's talk
great.
about our communication on acid.
When we weren't talking, like when we were talking in our heads, you know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
there was no verbiage going on.
Yeah.
But as soon as we tried to convert thought into word, it was like we just hit a goddamn concrete wall.
Yes, I think the hug is a good representative of what our our communication was
Yeah.
like sometimes.
I know, like we were looping, right? And then you kept did you keep asking me, or did I think you were asking me no, you were asking how do we get out of the loop? Like how do
We were asking each other how to get out of the loop.
Okay.
And
Okay.
trying to come up with strategies to do so.
And I said to you, I was like, okay, this is how you get out of a loop. I was really confident. I remember I pulled you over here, right?
Yeah.
I think it was over here. And I was like, okay, so to get out of the loop, you got to give me a hug, and you just got to like just feel love. Like,
Did you feel love from that hug, Adam?
not from you at all. I give him a hug. He's like this. As I touch, he went from like casual to
Picture essentially a human body with rigor mortis being forced to give a hug.
Did you even raise your hands to hug?
I
or were you
raised
just
them
like this?
probably directly straight in front of me and then somewhat closed them over you. I learned a lot about my ability to physically communicate 2 days ago.
Oh man, yeah. And see, the thing is, I was taking your
We were taking a lot of cues from each other and misinterpreting nearly every cue.
exactly.
Yes.
So I thought you not wanting to like hug me meant that you were distrustful of my warmth, but it wasn't.
In fact, I was feeling your warmth tremendously. It was extremely obvious that how much you cared about the other person in the experience, and it was only my inability to communicate that gave you that impression. But what was so strange, the strange dichotomy, was that we also had what you just said, telepathic experiences, and not just necessarily telepathic where thoughts feel like they're being exchanged, but just a sense of oneness with the other conscious entity. I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah. There was times when I actually
Oh,
didn't.
look at you eating that olive. I'm disgusted.
I didn't know who was who. Imagine like not knowing who's who while I'm eating an olive. How would that make you feel?
Made me feel very upset. I think that's actually why I hugged you that way. I thought about your olive habit.
I would say the most challenging part of that trip was just like miscommunicating with you.
And I think because acid already adds infinite potential to every action, every thought that you're having, everything of that nature, that when you have a miscommunication, it's not just a miscommunication. It feels like an infinite set of ways that you just misunderstood somebody and you don't know how.
And it's so frustrating too, because there was times when I know that I was misunderstanding you,
And I knew I was misunderstanding you.
and do you remember that part where I was like, I just need to stop talking to you, but then I said that and I was like, oh no, did that come off mean?
Exactly.
Was I being mean?
Exactly. You're thinking about the ramifications of everything that you just broadcasted to the other person. and wondering if the signal got through.
Did you think I was being mean when I said that?
Not at all.
Because see, in my head, I was like, oh, that was mean.
I thought Adam was being tremendously friendly and helpful during the experience, and I have a somewhat dry nature, I guess, and so it's hard to express that you're feeling loved.
No, but dude, there was times when like I remember complimenting you, and you thought I was being sarcastic.
Yes,
and I was like, no, I mean it.
I
like
did.
that was what you were saying was
Adam,
so interesting.
Adam sometimes was like, that's a really interesting point, Quentin. And I was like, oh, that's strange. He's being so sarcastic about what I'm saying. And Adam's over here actually like very interested in what I'm saying.
Yeah, that was interesting.
It's probably also worth mentioning the meditation that we did and the way that we entered the experience.
Man. We entered it in a really positive way.
Very positive.
Yeah. And I think that's really powerful for people to know. Part of the reason why, like, remember I brought out these notes?
Yep.
Like I brought out these notes because...
Those are all yours too.
Oh, I grabbed mine. When you're writing these, you're thinking about them. And I feel that the thoughts you have entering the trip can kind of dictate the emotional flavor of the experience you're, about to undergo.
You're
so
completely
like,
right.
We were like writing, like I've talked about this briefly on Instagram, but I don't know if I've made a video on it. Like I wrote, my perception creates reality. Not the most comforting, but then here we go. I embody love. Like that's like,
Yes.
okay. And then I kind of did start embodying love. Like I was hugging and it's like,
Maybe I should have written that as well.
you should have.
Maybe I should have written, I like to hug.
I am grounded.
I am grounded.
I felt very grounded for most of it. Like there was times when I was terrified, but I always went back to my breathing.
I felt deeply grounded when I would retreat to following the breath in what I was doing. Also worth mentioning how tremendously beneficial listening to a Sam Harris guided meditation was going into the experience.
Oh, he's the man.
He's the man. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good one. Strange is good. It was
I don't
very
know anymore.
strange.
I don't know if it's good anymore. I'll have to think about that one.
I tried. Everything is all right.
See, that's what's so fascinating about.
No.
See, thank God that
No,
all has
my
left its
martini.
terrible cage. I have here written that I am the observer, and I find that fascinating that it's somewhat actually, I guess, guided or prompted my experience because I think more than anything, I've left this experience with a deep intuition that the observer that sits behind the ego or the self is essentially unable to be separated. Even in the midst of me and Adam's ridiculous thought loops and crazy adventures we went on, there was still this strange observer in both of our minds that was able to notice this phenomenon that was happening.
Always.
Always.
And that was strange because like as much we were in like getting ahead of myself. I was in that loop where you fist bumped
Which
me
loop?
and you were just
Yeah.
actually like it was actually just happening over and over again. But then I realized there's someone who's aware that it's happening. Like it's not really a loop because if it was a loop, I wouldn't have been aware.
Exactly.
But there's something outside of it watching the loop.
And I think it's fair to say that we both at least once experienced what you may call an ego death. And so it was
Thousands.
Thousands is more like it. And so it was interesting to watch the ego die and then reemerge because what is watching the ego die and then reemerge? And so I think that impression has not left me whatsoever. And so I look forward to investigating that.
What do you think is watching?
Well, I call it the observer, but it seems to just be the consciousness before concepts are introduced. It seems to just be pure consciousness without structure.
Mic a little closer.
Yes.
No, not your head. You can move the mic a
I
little.
can even bring the mic a little bit.
You can.
All right.
You have that
This
ability.
is my world now.
This is your world. When you go like this close, you can whisper a little bit, and it turns into an ASMR.
How is everybody? Good night.
Guys, you're looking incredibly sexy tonight.
Yeah.
Is this like an alluring way to talk?
This is quite an alluring way to talk. Oh, it's also worth mentioning the role of music going into a trip should not be understated. I think it's the highly suggestible mood that you're in when you're on acid.
See, I was talking about this before we went into it. Remember, I was saying when you're on acid, you are so suggestible. And I don't think me saying that prompted it. Maybe it made us more suggestible on some level just because of that
I
suggestibility.
think we were so suggestible. Yeah, we realized we were suggestible.
Yeah. No, but it is so true. And you're not just susceptible. This is the thing. People think they're just going to be susceptible to outside things. They forget about their own part in the play. You are so susceptible to your own thoughts.
Indeed.
Like one negative, usually bad trips start with one negative thought. You have one bad thought and it spirals into some more bad thoughts. And let's talk about that. So we were at the 5 or 6 hour mark and we both had a pretty, good and challenging trip.
Very dynamic in every moment.
But we were both like overall, I would say I was loving it. Like I was enjoying it
I would do it again.
overall, for sure. But then here's just how susceptible you are to thoughts. I had the bright idea, right?
Very bright.
Very, very bright. Almost as bright as these lights. baby.
Blinding, in fact.
Idea to smoke DMT, which was good. That DMT with acid, like if you remember, I was on the couch, like I remember like I was starting to go under, right? I don't know if you were watching me, but I was
watching you very closely.
You know, like I was going away.
You were gone.
Yeah. And then like I came back and I explained to you a very interesting experience of like this inviting thing in the corner of my visual field that was just kind of there. And then I didn't notice it. And then it just kind of became all encompassing. Like it snuck up on me. And that was all good. And then I had the even brighter idea to do a nitrous at the same time.
Yes. And it's also worth mentioning here that I decided as well to try some nitrous while under the influence of LSD. And while nitrous isn't something I would probably implement into my daily life, it is a fascinating tool to combine with certain psychedelics, as long as you use it safely.
Well, what do you mean fascinating? Like, what did it do for you? Before I continue my story, let's ADHD it back to you.
Yeah. Let's see if we can wrap this, wind this thing back in here. Nitrous to me was very, very strange. It was like the moment it actually begins to hit you, it's so disassociative that you're not even sure if you're still breathing in the nitrous. And that's a very, very strange sensation. So as you're breathing it in and it has now been going through your bloodstream, when you pull the balloon or however you're ingesting the nitrogen away from your lips, you're not aware of it whatsoever. And so you're left wondering, am I just breathing in nitrous permanently? Am I, when did I stop? And
is it my new oxygen?
Yes. Is this new oxygen? And this is the moment that a tremendous ringing began. I mean, it might as well have been an alarm clock. It was just earth shattering how loud it was. And sound enough isn't enough to explain what it feels like, but it's definitely good to mention the ringing. But what it is more than anything is just almost like a synergetic tool that goes along with psychedelics.
People call it the psychedelic channel changer.
Definitely the psychedelic channel changer. Me and Adam deliberately synced up our nitrous experiences, and that actually is somewhat what led to our telepathic experience.
The most intense aspect of the most experience. Intense aspect. Like we were having telepathic experiences, but it wasn't until we did the nitrous, right, that it was like undeniable. Like no questions. And it's crazy how we both had that. And I can't speak for you, but since I had the DMT that I just smoked, mine went even beyond like telepathic. Like I did the nitrous, and then remember when you came by to fist pump me to tell me that you were okay. But when you told me you were okay, I was very much...
He was also flat on his back. That is worth mentioning when I fist bumped him.
Yeah, and there's something to do with touch. It like I've had this before with DMT, right? Like it activated something.
It was a catalyst.
It was a catalyst to launch me into this insane nitrous-fueled DMT acid trip, and I started looping, like you know when you normally loop and it's just like you're saying the same thing again.
Oh, I did.
I was looping not in that sense, but in the sense where I was you, and then I was me, and then I was you, and the first thing I noticed was you kept. And this is just unique to my experience.
Okay, so I walk up to Adam, I fist bump him, and what happens then?
So for me, you did another circle, and you fist pump me again, and then I'm still laying there, and then you do another circle, and you fist pump me again, and the observer in me is like, this has happened a few times now. Like,
why does he keep fist bumping?
Like, what is going on? But then I'm in your head, and I'm you walking over to me, fist pumping, and then I'm like, okay, let's of course the observer in me is like, I was trying to stay calm. Like, we're just gonna. I know this will pass.
You did a great job. I would have lost my mind if I had that experience.
I'm just gonna pause the video with Quentin for just a minute because there's something very important that I didn't touch on when we were having this conversation, and that is when you mix nitrous, DMT, and LSD. You do have a very large potential to actually lose your mind. And that's basically what happened to me. This shook me to my core. I was so scared after this combination that I actually grabbed my DMT and I dumped it down the sink. I flushed it. Now, I don't want to spoil it because this is actually something I want to go into more detail in during a future video. However, I do just want to preface it by saying I do not recommend that anyone out there has this combination, because during this, if I didn't take safety precautions such as having trip killers and make sure there was a trip sitter upstairs, I don't know what would have happened. I mean, I was so freaking shook that I was convinced that I was dead and I was in some kind of a hell because I was trapped in an infinite loop, which actually, in my experience, didn't have any breaks in it. So it just felt like linear time. And I almost believed that the only way out would be to kill myself. If you ever saw that one series of American Horror Story where they're trapped in their own version of hell and then the witches have to come and save them, where they're just repeating their worst experience over and over again, it was like actually experiencing that. And I don't mean thinking that that's what's happening. I mean actually experiencing it. So yeah, it was dreadful. I'm convinced that I am never going to be the same again afterwards, for better or for worse. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
The observer in me is like, I was trying to stay calm. Like, we're just going to, I know this will pass.
You did a great job. I would have lost my mind if I had that experience.
We'll just observe this. So then I remember I stood up and then I went and I sat on the couch with you, right? And I sit down beside you.
That's where things got wonky for me.
And like, if you listen to the audio, it's interesting because you actually did start looping. Mm-hmm. Like you said, so I'm having this DMT experience of things looping, but then when I sit down, you said the exact same thing again.
It is proven on audio.
That you said when you walked around in the circle. And then I actually cut you off. I was like, you're looping, man.
Yeah, and I think I responded, wow, that was such a good loop. I don't remember what I just said. Like, I had no memory of looping.
But as soon as you said that, I was looking at the DMT bottle, and I like, as if there was a gravitational pull coming out of the yellow lettering. I remember very vividly the red and yellow color scheme on the label, and I got like sucked into it, but not in the sense of where it felt like I was just, the red was like, I was getting sucked into it, everything was red. It was like, as I pulled in, it was a never-ending fractal where next thing I know, I was looking at like this red speck on the wall, and then I was like, I get pulled into that, and then released through the wall, and then I get pulled into the letters, and then released through some other corner of the room, and it was like this never-ending fractal zoom of just.
And you were doing your best to explain that to me as well.
Man.
See, now for me, my experience of, you may call in the category of telepathy, was when we were both sitting somewhat symmetrically across from each other on the couch. And as I was staring at you, it was almost as if the boundaries of my consciousness dissolved, and I was unaware if I was looking into a mirror reflection or not. I was unaware if I was seeing Adam, but it seemed to give me the impression that it was actually me that I was looking back at. And so there's a lot to be answered about what type of, just exactly what consciousness can do when probed differently.
Well, what consciousness is?
First of all, yeah, what it is, how it emerges, and what its upper limit is.
I think I have an answer as to how it emerges. I think it just is. I think it's a fundamental law of the universe. Like, I think this sounds so spiritual and esoteric, and people have heard this before.
Let's get esoteric.
But I think the universe is a conscious entity. Mm-hmm. I think this table, I think every aspect of reality has some kind of conscious contingency to it. Because when I was like zooming through all these things, it was my consciousness, but all of a sudden I'd become like whatever I was going into. Like, like the observer part of me was no longer attached to my brain. Like, say I'm tethered to this body, like I was the wall.
Did the observer move as well?
That's what I'm saying.
Fascinating.
The observer was moving into all these objects, and it was so confusing because I was like, I had no idea what was going on, but it was still my conscious experience, but it was no longer tethered to my body. It was so weird.
That is extremely strange.
And I had this glimpse of, that's the answer. Like when I finally stopped getting sucked through all these fractals, like it actually felt like I was going through different dimensions. Like, when you have, like, I've said this with my salvia trip, a mirror in front of a mirror, and you can see like all this, they just like extends for infinity.
Yeah.
Right. That's what it felt like, almost. Not exactly. I'm just trying to convert it into human language, but I was like getting yanked through all of these different dimensional layers that make absolutely no conscious sense when you convert it into language. But it fully felt like in a Rick and Morty episode, I was going through parallel dimensions of different versions of me. And then I finally like, but not just me, by the way, like I was you too. Like I was going, like I was bouncing between being me and you. And then when I finally pulled back to being me, I think I said this on video too, like we'll have it on the audio, the entire universe flipped.
Uh-oh, we're in the upside down.
Yeah. No, like, I mean, my visual field like actually like did this flip and then this twist. And then it was like, and then I was like, I felt like I was in a different dimension than I started. And I remember I said to you, I was like, I don't know if I'm this dimension's Adam.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you are either.
And I feel like something died.
Yes, we also both had the very strong impression that the actions that we took may have altered, I guess you could say, the time-space continuum or something like that.
But the trippy thing is we had that thought at the exact same time, and we looked at each other
did.
at the exact same time, and you said
You
it.
said, did we just do something?
Yeah,
Something like that.
But it was like we were fully in each other's heads because there's no other explanation. Like,
Yes.
how did we have that exact feeling at the same time?
And I have the impression science is really going to struggle to explain these phenomena. It's just something about how conscious agents interact is very hard to reduce to materialistic words.
But anyway, on a lighter note, we are now finally selling these hooded blankets. That's what they are. It's actually a blanket. See this? With a hood on it. And it is incredibly soft. Like, we went through about 6 trial versions to land on this one. Designed by trippers for trippers. You can also use them at like festivals, meditation retreats, I mean around your house. I find myself just snuggling up in this because it's just, you know, so soft and cozy, and I love these little mitt feature of it. We're only selling about 300 of these, so not to turn this video into a huge advertisement, but if you want to pick one up, you gotta make your way over to psychsubstance.shop and pre-order one immediately.
It's only so far.
And I mean, insofar as the observer that we're talking about might be a discrete unit that is currently inside you, we really don't know whether or not it can be transferred into different substrates. We really don't know.
That makes me think of mushrooms.
Yeah, a lot of
That
stuff makes me
word.
think of mushrooms. I love mushrooms.
Substrate.
Yeah, substrate. Yeah, for sure.
But no, you're right, man. We got no idea.
We have no idea. And to say that we have any idea is extremely arrogant, and not only that, but wrong.
You think it's wrong?
It's certainly wrong. I mean,
Elaborate.
if you claim that we know how atoms can stack into patterns that become self-aware, you're going to need to show me the paper that shows how we understand that, because it does not exist.
So what do you think of like pure reductionists?
I think that pure reductionists are lacking certain experiences, and so it's very easy to operate under that mode, because I think when you self-reflect, you find that a lot of your beliefs ultimately do tend to project from experiential experiences that you've had. And so when, for example, like on mushrooms, when you have this sense of intercommunication with plants, wildlife, or even inanimate objects, that shakes you to the core. And so it's a lot harder to, and it's really easy actually to dismiss it as some type of a hallucination, but
Wouldn't a reductionist do that?
they would, but it's also very likely that they have not had that experience. And I'm not saying that there aren't reductionists who have tripped, but it's certainly a deeper question than reductionists are giving it credit, especially with the consciousness question still not being
Do you think
answered.
there's a certain degree of ego in people like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And not ego, but fear. I mean, how much more convenient would it be if we could explain this construct that we're in? It would be much more soothing than to realize we're in an extremely dynamic
See,
place.
not everyone sees it that way. Some people, they don't see it as soothing. They actually think they're so brave to face this deep, terrifying truth. So they're not soothed
I'll show
by
you
it.
deep, terrifying truth.
Do what we did.
And it's often not reductionistic.
I would love to see someone like that have the kind of trip we had.
Yes, I would as well, because it's you realize that a lot of reductionism is based in just concepts, and when all concepts are dissolved, good luck maintaining the reductionism. Because I very much was a reductionist. I was the cliche dismissive materialist for a lot of my life, and it took several large spiritual experiences induced by psychedelics to get me to question that.
I've had this conversation with someone else I know about DMT, and I've tried to tell them that until you have that breakthrough experience, you really can't say that you know for sure what is going on in conscious reality. And it's amazing how people who haven't had the experience are so quick to jump on the boat of it wouldn't change me.
Yeah.
Like, why do you make claims that you have no basis of understanding for?
That actually gets me excited, because I would love to give them something, right?
Wouldn't you?
Yeah, because it's extremely hard to maintain that framework. I mean, I'm not even close to being the first scientist or attempting to be scientist to try a substance and essentially realize that a lot of materialism is lacking certain elements.
So what do you think the issue is? Why do you think it's lacking those elements?
Because consciousness is an emergent property that is very hard to explain, because it is somewhat possibly reducible to atoms in certain patterns, but we really have no framework to even understand how a thought arises. We have tools that we can use to measure oxygen and blood flow in the brain, but I mean, a lot of people, it's easy for them to be convinced. Yep, I saw a picture of an fMRI and it showed certain colors, so I understand how the brain works. But what you realize is those are just proxies for activity going on in the brain, and it says absolutely nothing why when you feel something you actually, or why when something touches you actually feel it, or why vanilla tastes like vanilla.
That's a good one. Yeah. How do you break down taste?
They would speak about receptors in your taste buds and things like that, but that ultimately does not explain why we should have any experience whatsoever. That does not explain that at all, because every other object that we see is also a pattern of atoms. This cup, this table. And while you believe that they're conscious, a materialist would say it's not. Yet we are arguably indistinguishable from that in terms of a pattern of atoms, and yet we know we exist. So all we know is that for some reason this arrangement of atoms knows that they are atoms.
Well, I feel like when people talk about, say, the creator, I don't know if I necessarily believe in like this. I don't. First of all, I don't know what the fuck I believe, but
Right.
but I don't know if I necessarily believe that there's a creator that started this. I more so tend to follow the belief system that this is a conscious universe, and you would need a conscious universe to birth conscious beings. Like I just feel like, and I don't know how to define consciousness, but when I have those experiences where like I'm becoming all of these, like I'm viewing myself from all these different things, it really does feel like whatever this consciousness thing is, it has some kind of a deep rooted connection to every aspect of this.
Yeah, I mean,
like a computer, right?
yeah, you can claim that consciousness is basically just a naturally selected for trait that helped us survive, but there are plenty of animals who we may not call conscious who are doing just fine without it. And it's just an interesting question.
It is, and maybe there's no simple answer to it.
There's certainly not. We're not even sure. All we can do is observe animal behavior, and certain animals seem to be more conscious or represent more human-like behavior. But look at what I just said. We're using humans as the reference compound to explain consciousness.
Right. And what gets me is that everything that we think about or consider has to first be filtered through our own brains.
Yes.
Which
Deeply
are
problematic.
limited.
Very much so.
Like we don't even know if what we're perceiving right now as a visual field is all that there is to see.
And there certainly isn't. There's microbes crawling all over this table.
Right? And there could actually be senses there are senses we don't have.
Certainly.
Like echolocation.
The light spectrum, we can see very little of
We
it.
can't see it. We can't hear. You know, as good as dogs. We can't smell as good as
You
dogs.
can't hear a dog whistle, and yet it exists.
And imagine like how smell would be so dramatically different if we had like a dog's receptors. It would be so different that we would probably, if we were like a dog for a day, we would come back and be like, I had no idea that's what smell was.
And that's where things get interesting, because humans do lack certain senses, and so we build tools to perceive things that we cannot. And so it's hard to know whether or not some of these compounds may in fact be newly discovered tools for the psyche.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
That could be the way of implanting us with a new sense.
Yeah, and we spoke recently about how recent a lot of these compounds have existed for, and we're very much at the beginning of understanding their full potential.
If you look at the history of even just humanity, LSD was discovered, we talked about this, what, the 30s maybe, 40s, somewhere around there.
We're 100 years in, not even
100 years
even
in
100.
of having this new tool that might implant us with new senses.
at least heightened perception. That's
a
certainly
new
true.
sense, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the ability for me to be inside your head, to have nonverbal communication, telepathy.
Yeah.
That is like a lot of people have, in say the spiritual world, have predicted that the ascension of humankind is to be able to speak through our minds. Like
Really?
they think that's the next step. I've heard people say that, and it's interesting because we can take a psychedelic and we can have that experience already.
Yes.
So is it the next step, or are we currently realizing that maybe to reach the next steps we have to use tools?
Yeah, and that telepathic state that we had left me really wondering how much more it could be refined.
But dude, the fucked up part is people will hear this and they're gonna think that it was in our head. Like they're gonna
I'm
think,
deeply okay with that, because everything is in your head.
but they're gonna think that they assumed that they could hear each other's thoughts. They don't understand what it feels like to actually move from mind. Like they don't understand.
Well, I'm here to say that I had no intent to do that whatsoever.
Neither did
and
I.
Yet I was victim to it nonetheless.
Victim's a good word because it wasn't always fun.
Yes, it was not necessarily voluntary,
or warranted.
or warranted whatsoever.
It was like I wanted it to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very interesting.
It's not like it's something, it's not like something. sometimes people they create their own reality, like they want something to happen, so then they find clues that don't necessarily lead them down that trail, but they make it form their narrative. We weren't making this narrative.
This was us observing something and being like, why did that just happen? I did not,
yeah.
Very interesting.
But again, there's so many people who believe
And I'm
that.
open-minded. Of course, I'm open-minded to the fact that that could have been a complex hallucination. Of course I am. But
At the time we said that, though. At the time we were like, we're going to come out of this and talk ourselves out of it.
and it was also, that was also fascinating to watch as the effects diminished, the rationalization creep in. That seems to be an area of the brain that loves to explain the unexplainable.
Well, and also just kind of explain it off as just a random occurrence that was coincidental.
I know people are going to hear this and be like, dude, you were on acid, nitrous, and DMT. Of course you saw things. And I'm here to say yes.
I'm here to say that you need to open up your fucking mind.
Absolutely.
But what gets me, though, is like I've said, in the past, I've only had that experience with people I had a connection with. So I wonder why we had that experience.
Well,
because it's not like we have any love between us.
Yeah.
I'm trying to give this motherfucker love, and he's like, I am robot. Do not touch me.
Well, that's what happens when you do acid with a Minecraft NPC.
So, like, why? I mean, we have ADHD in common. We can talk a bit about that. Shit, I don't know how to transition from this topic
I
to
was going to
ADHD.
say, we spoke at that moment that despite the telepathic effect that happened, I believe that it would have been much more synchronous if we did know each other much more intimately.
Probably.
It's possible that perhaps that conscious agents that have been associated with one another have perhaps carved certain networks in common that allows them to sync up quicker.
Maybe we would have had less of a miscommunication, for sure.
Certainly.
Yeah. And that would have changed the whole flavor of the experience.
Fascinating, right? That we both experience communication and telepathy. What a dichotomy. Miscommunication and telepathy.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
You'd think to have telepathy, you have to like really communicate well.
No, it turns out you can have a lot of miscommunications and still inhabit each other's bodies.
But I think it's also fascinating that we were actually both aware that we were miscommunicating. Like, you can miscommunicate, and I could be stuck in my ways and think that you're just a dick.
Yeah, usually a miscommunication does not, the parties are not aware of it.
No, but we were like, okay, we know we're miscommunicating.
Yes, our observers were so annoyed. Absolutely.
Oh, what a fucking trip.
Yeah, what a fucking trip.
Yeah,
how do we into speaking about our harebrained nature?
How do we go from this? I don't know.
Yeah. I'll take a drink of this martini. Maybe it'll inspire me.
I spilled one. I'm actually pausing for 2 minutes to make another one.
Cool.
As like a pause, I think we're doing good.
I think we're doing great.
This is fun.
That was very entertaining.
Yeah, no, we're doing well. Give me 1 second. Anyway. If you enjoyed this video, I highly suggest you subscribe to Quentin's channel, The Quentin Experiment. You can find him here. Some of these videos I filmed with Quentin are amazing. I've got some really cool stuff to come. Anyway, till next time, take care, guys. Love you all. See you later.